Elijah Cole spent 10 years convincing himself the Apache woman he saved was dead or had forgotten him completely. Then she appeared in a crowded Arizona saloon, pressed her palm against his weathered cheek, and whispered that she had never stopped searching. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The afternoon sun blazed over the town of Copper Hollow, Arizona Territory, casting long shadows across the dusty main street where Elijah Cole had spent the better part of a decade trying to forget. At 34 years old, he had grown accustomed to the rhythm of ranch work, the predictable cycle of cattle drives and fence repairs, the solitude that wrapped around him like a worn blanket every night when he returned to his small cabin on the outskirts of town. He told himself the loneliness was comfortable, that a man didn't need much more than honest labor and a roof over his head. But there were nights, too many to count, when the wind carried whispers across the desert and he found himself staring into the darkness, remembering eyes as dark as Apache tears and a voice that had promised she would find him again. He had been 24 when fate first tangled his path with hers, young and reckless, riding dispatch for the cavalry through Chiricahua territory during the worst of the conflicts. The memory still haunted him, the smoke rising from her village, the screams that seemed to echo across time itself. He had found her huddled behind a burning wickiup, a girl of perhaps 18 summers, fierce even in terror, clutching a knife she clearly knew how to use. Their eyes had met across the chaos, and something had passed between them that he had never been able to name. He should have ridden on. He should have followed orders. Instead, he had dismounted, approached her slowly with his hands raised, and spoken the only Apache words he knew. "Do not be afraid." She had not been afraid. That was what struck him most, even now. She had studied him with those midnight eyes, measuring his soul in a single glance, and somehow found him worthy of trust. He had helped her escape the soldiers, guided her to safety in the mountains where her people had fled, and in those 3 desperate days of running and hiding, something had bloomed between them that transcended the hatred and violence surrounding them on all sides. Her name was Kaya, she had told him, which meant my elder sister in her tongue, though she was the youngest of her family. She had laughed when she explained the name, a sound so unexpected and beautiful that it had carved itself permanently into his memory. On the last morning, as the sun rose pink and gold over the Dragoon Mountains, she had pressed her palm against his cheek and spoken words he had carried with him every day since. "I will find you again, cowboy. No matter how long it takes, no matter how far you run. My spirit knows yours now, and spirits cannot be separated by distance or time." Then she had disappeared into the wilderness, and Elijah Cole had returned to a life that suddenly felt empty and meaningless. He had deserted the cavalry 3 months later, unable to stomach the work anymore, and drifted westward, taking jobs on ranches and trying to outrun the memory of a promise he was certain could never be kept. 10 years. 10 years of wondering if she had survived, if she had found her people, if she ever thought of the young soldier who had risked everything to help her. 10 years of half expecting to see her face in every crowd, hearing her voice in every woman's laughter, searching for those dark eyes in every passing stranger. Eventually, the hope had faded to a dull ache, a scar on his heart that he learned to live with but never quite forget. The telegram had arrived 3 days ago, delivered by young Billy Preston, who had ridden out to the Cole Ranch with the kind of urgency that suggested something important. Elijah had assumed it was ranch business, perhaps word from the cattle buyers in Tucson. Instead, he had found himself staring at words that made his heart stop beating in his chest. "A woman seeks the soldier who showed mercy. She waits in Copper Hollow. Come if you remember." The message was unsigned, but he knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. Now he stood outside the Dusty Rose Saloon, his hat clutched in hands that had not trembled in years, trying to find the courage to walk through those swinging doors. The afternoon crowd was light, mostly miners and ranch hands seeking respite from the brutal Arizona heat. Through the grimy window, he could see the usual collection of card players and drinkers, nothing that suggested the presence of anyone unusual. But his instincts, honed by years of survival on the frontier, told him she was there. He could feel her presence like heat from a fire, warming him even from a distance. The doors creaked as he pushed through them, and every head in the saloon turned to look at him. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and weather-beaten, with sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of desert sage. The years had not been kind to his face, leaving lines around his eyes and a scar across his jaw from a knife fight in Tombstone, but they had given him a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He scanned the room slowly, methodically, his gaze passing over familiar faces and dismissing them just as quickly. Then he saw her. She sat alone at a corner table, her back to the wall in the manner of someone who had learned never to leave themselves vulnerable. She wore a simple cotton dress in deep blue, modest by frontier standards, but her dark hair was adorned with a beaded headband that spoke of her heritage, and turquoise jewelry glinted at her ears and wrists. She had aged, of course, the girl's softness giving way to a woman's strength, but those eyes were exactly as he remembered them, dark and deep and capable of seeing straight through to the truth of a person. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The saloon noise faded to a distant buzz, meaningless against the thundering of his heart. Then she rose from her chair, her movements graceful and deliberate, and crossed the room toward him with the confidence of someone who had spent 10 years preparing for this exact moment. When she stopped in front of him, close enough that he could smell sage and wildflowers, she reached up and pressed her palm against his weathered cheek, exactly as she had done on that long-ago morning in the mountains. Her voice was barely a whisper meant for his ears alone. "I never forgot your face, Cowboy. I have searched 10 years to find you." Elijah felt the warmth of her touch radiate through his entire being, melting the ice that had formed around his heart during a decade of loneliness and regret. He covered her hand with his own, marveling at how perfectly it fit against his palm, how right it felt to be standing here with her after all these years. The saloon patrons had returned to their drinks and conversations, sensing that whatever was happening between these two strangers was none of their business. In a frontier town, people learned not to ask questions that might get them killed. "Kaya," he breathed, her name feeling like a prayer on his lips. "How did you find me? I thought you were gone forever. I thought the soldiers might have caught you." She smiled, and it was the same smile that had haunted his dreams for 10 years, fierce and tender all at once. "Those spirits guided me," she said simply, "and I am very stubborn. My grandmother always said I was born with the determination of a mountain lion and the patience of the desert itself. Both were needed to track one wandering cowboy across 3 territories." He laughed despite himself, the sound rusty from disuse. He had not laughed, truly laughed, since the last time he had seen her. "Come," he said, guiding her back to her corner table where they could talk without being overheard. "Tell me everything. Tell me where you have been, what has happened to you. I need to know." They sat across from each other, and Kaya began her story in the measured cadence of someone who had learned to guard her words carefully. After leaving him in the mountains, she had rejoined what remained of her family, her grandmother, and 2 younger cousins who had survived the attack on their village. They had fled south into Mexico, joining other Apache bands who had escaped the reservation system, living free in the Sierra Madre, where the American cavalry could not follow. For 5 years, she had lived as her ancestors had lived, learning the old ways from her grandmother, becoming a healer and a keeper of traditions. But freedom in Mexico had not lasted. The Mexican government had grown tired of Apache raids on their settlements, and they had begun their own campaigns of extermination. Her grandmother had died during a hard winter, and her cousins had been killed in a skirmish with Mexican soldiers. Kaya had found herself alone, the last of her immediate family, carrying the weight of memories and traditions that had no one left to receive them. She had made her way back north, crossing the border into Arizona territory, where she had spent the last 5 years searching for the soldier who had shown her mercy. It had not been easy. She had worked as a laundress, a cook, a seamstress, taking whatever jobs would allow her to survive, while she followed the cold trail of a man who had changed his name and moved constantly. She had learned to navigate the white man's world without losing herself, wearing their clothes and speaking their language while keeping her spirit intact beneath the surface. "Why did you search so hard?" Elijah asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "You could have built a new life, found a husband among your people or even among the Mexicans. Why spend 10 years chasing a ghost?" Kaya reached across the table and took his hands in hers. Her fingers were calloused from years of hard work, but her touch was gentle. "Because you are not a ghost," she said. "You are the man who saw me as a person when everyone else saw only an enemy. You risked your life, your freedom, everything for a stranger. My grandmother told me that such men are rare, and that when the spirits send one into your path, you must hold on to him with all your strength." Elijah felt tears prick at his eyes, an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "I have thought of you every day," he admitted. "Every single day. I told myself you had forgotten, that our time together was nothing more than a moment of crisis, meaningless once the danger had passed. I told myself I was a fool for hoping." "You are a fool," she agreed, but her eyes sparkled with warmth. "We are both fools, fools who believed in something impossible, and who were right to believe." The bartender approached their table, a weathered man named Sam, who had known Elijah for years. He set down 2 glasses of whiskey without being asked, his expression carefully neutral. "Everything all right here, Cole?" he asked, his eyes flicking to Kaya with obvious curiosity. "Everything is fine, Sam." Elijah's voice carried a warning that the bartender was wise enough to heed. "This is an old friend." Sam nodded and retreated, though Elijah could feel the weight of curious stares from around the room. Copper Hollow was not the most progressive town in the territory, and an Apache woman sitting openly in a saloon was bound to attract attention, most of it unwelcome. He would need to get her somewhere safe before the wrong people started asking questions. "You cannot stay here," he said quietly. "This town has its share of men who would cause trouble for you simply because of who you are." "I know," Kaya replied. "I have learned to recognize hatred. It wears many faces, but the eyes always tell the truth." She paused, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. "I did not come here expecting you to save me again, Elijah. I came because I needed to see you, to know if the connection I remembered was real or only a dream born of desperation." "And now that you have seen me?" he asked. She smiled, that fierce and tender smile that had lived in his memory for a decade. "Now I know that it was real. Whatever happens next, I have my answer. But I hope," she added, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, "that what happens next is that we finally stop running from each other and discover what we could become together." Elijah did not hesitate. He had spent 10 years hesitating, 10 years wondering and regretting and letting fear dictate his choices. He was done with all of it. He reached into his pocket and left enough coins on the table to cover their drinks, and then some, then rose and offered Kaya his hand. "Come with me," he said. "I have a cabin about 3 miles out of town. It is not much, but it is safe, and we can talk there without half the town listening to every word." Kaya took his hand and stood, her movements fluid and confident. She did not look around at the staring faces, did not acknowledge the whispers that followed them as they walked toward the door. She had learned long ago that showing fear only invited more cruelty, and she would not give these strangers the satisfaction. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Elijah of that morning in the Dragoons when he had watched her disappear into the wilderness. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Dusty, was tied at the hitching post outside the saloon. Elijah helped Kaya mount first, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. The position was intimate, her back pressed against his chest, and he felt her relax into him as if she had been waiting her whole life to be exactly here. They rode in comfortable silence through the outskirts of town, past the livery stable and the blacksmith shop, past the small cemetery where too many good men and women lay buried beneath wooden crosses. The cabin came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest structure of adobe and timber that Elijah had built with his own hands 5 years ago. It sat in a shallow valley beside a seasonal creek, surrounded by mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. A small corral held 2 horses, and a chicken coop stood near the back. It was not impressive by any standard, but it was his, bought and paid for with honest wages and hard work. "It is peaceful here," Kaya said as he helped her dismount. "I can feel it. The land is good." "I have tried to make it a home," Elijah admitted, leading Dusty to the corral. "But it has always felt incomplete, like something was missing that I could not name." He showed her inside, suddenly self-conscious about the sparse furnishings and the bachelor disorder that had accumulated over years of living alone. A single bed occupied one corner, a small kitchen area another. A fireplace dominated one wall, and a worn armchair sat before it, the leather cracked from years of use. Books were stacked on every available surface, volumes of poetry and philosophy and history that he had collected during his wanderings. "You read," Kaya observed, picking up a worn copy of Leaves of Grass and examining it with evident curiosity. "My grandmother said that the white man kept his wisdom in marks on paper. She never understood why you could not simply remember your stories as we do." Elijah smiled, taking the book gently from her hands. "These are not stories of wisdom," he said. "They are poems, words arranged to make you feel things, to see the world differently. This one is by a man named Walt Whitman. He believed that every person contained multitudes, that we are all connected to everything and everyone around us." "That sounds like something my grandmother would have said," Kaya replied. "Perhaps your poets and our elders are not so different after all." They spent the next hour talking, truly talking, sharing the stories of their separate years in a way that felt like weaving 2 threads into a single tapestry. Elijah told her about his desertion from the cavalry, the guilt that had driven him from place to place, the failed relationships with women who could never quite reach the part of him that belonged to a memory. Kaya told him about the losses she had endured, the family members who had died one by one until she stood alone, the determination that had kept her searching when any sensible person would have given up. As darkness fell outside the cabin windows, Elijah lit the oil lamps and built a fire in the hearth. He prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, apologizing for the humble fare, but Kaya ate as if it were a feast, her eyes never leaving his face across the small table. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming, 2 people who had been alone for so long finally finding their way back to each other. "What happens now?" Elijah asked when the meal was finished, and they sat together before the fire. "I want you to stay, Kaya. God knows I want that more than I have ever wanted anything, but I need to be honest with you about what that would mean." Her dark eyes studied him with that penetrating gaze he remembered so well. "Tell me," she said simply. "This territory is not kind to people like us," he said carefully. "A white man and an Apache woman living together openly. There will be talk, and talk often leads to worse things. Some men in this town lost family in the Apache wars. They carry hatred in their hearts that nothing will ever soften. If you stay with me, you will be in danger. We both will." Kaya reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I have been in danger my entire life," she said. "I have watched my people hunted like animals, seen my family killed one by one. I have survived things that should have destroyed me. Do you think I am afraid of small-minded men and their petty hatred?" "I think you are the bravest person I have ever known," Elijah replied. "But I could not bear it if something happened to you because of me." "Then we will protect each other," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "as we did 10 years ago, as we were always meant to do." That night, Kaya slept in Elijah's bed while he made himself comfortable in the worn armchair before the fire. It was not the arrangement either of them truly wanted, but they both understood that some things needed time to unfold naturally. 10 years of separation could not be bridged in a single evening, no matter how powerful the connection between them. Trust had to be rebuilt, understanding deepened before they could fully reclaim what had been interrupted so long ago. Elijah did not sleep much. He spent most of the night watching the firelight flicker across the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of Kaya's breathing from across the room. Her presence filled the cabin in a way that made him realize just how empty it had been before. Every shadow seemed softer now, every silence less oppressive. He had grown accustomed to loneliness the way a man grows accustomed to a wound that never quite heals, learning to live with the pain rather than eliminating it. Now he understood that he had been only half alive all these years, waiting for something he had been afraid to name. When dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Elijah rose quietly and began preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee and frying bacon eventually roused Kaya, who emerged from beneath the blankets with her dark hair tousled and her eyes soft with sleep. She looked younger in that moment, more like the girl he remembered from the mountains, and his heart ached with a tenderness he had thought himself incapable of feeling. "Good morning," he said, setting a plate before her. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in years," she admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup he offered. "There is peace in this place, and in you. I felt safe enough to truly rest." They ate in companionable silence, watching through the window as the desert came alive with morning light. Jackrabbits bounded through the scrubland and a red-tailed hawk circled lazily overhead searching for prey. It was a scene Elijah had witnessed countless times, but somehow it seemed more beautiful with Kaya beside him, as if her presence had sharpened his senses and awakened him to wonders he had stopped noticing long ago. After breakfast, he showed her around the property, pointing out the vegetable garden he had planted last spring, the well he had dug himself, the small barn where he kept his tools and supplies. She examined everything with genuine interest, asking questions about his methods and offering suggestions based on the traditional knowledge her grandmother had passed down. Her people had lived in this desert for generations, she reminded him, and they had learned secrets about survival that the white settlers were only beginning to understand. "You should plant agave here," she said, gesturing toward a sunny patch near the cabin. "It requires little water and provides food, fiber, and medicine. My grandmother made a salve from agave that could heal almost any wound." "I would like to learn," Elijah said, "if you are willing to teach me." Her smile was radiant. "I am willing to teach you many things, Cowboy, if you are patient enough to learn." The morning passed quickly, filled with conversation and shared labor. They worked together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, moving in easy coordination as if they had been partners for years instead of hours. Elijah found himself marveling at her strength and competence, the way she approached every task with focused determination. She was not a woman who waited to be rescued or protected. She was a survivor, a warrior in her own right, and he respected her more with each passing moment. It was nearly noon when the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered their peaceful morning. Elijah straightened from his work, shading his eyes against the sun to identify the riders. His stomach tightened when he recognized the lead horse, a distinctive pinto that belonged to Wade Hollister, owner of the largest ranch in the territory, and a man whose hatred of Apache people was legendary. Hollister had lost his wife and young son in a raid 15 years ago, and he had never recovered from the grief. He blamed all Apache for the actions of a few, and he had made it his personal mission to drive every remaining native person out of the territory by whatever means necessary. 3 riders approached, Hollister in the lead with 2 of his ranch hands flanking him. They were all armed, rifles resting across their saddles in a casual display of threat. Elijah moved instinctively to position himself between them and Kaya, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. "Cole," Hollister called out as he reined in his horse. "Heard you had a visitor from town. Thought I would ride out and see for myself if the rumors were true." "What rumors would those be?" Elijah asked, keeping his voice calm despite the tension coiling in his gut. Hollister's cold blue eyes shifted to Kaya, and his lip curled with undisguised contempt. "That you have taken up with Apache filth. That you have brought the enemy into our midst, and are sheltering her on land that was bought with American blood." Kaya stepped forward, placing her hand on Elijah's arm. Her touch was steady, grounding him even as rage threatened to cloud his judgment. "This woman is my guest," Elijah said firmly. "She is welcome on my property, and she has done nothing to harm anyone." "She is Apache," Hollister spat. "That is harm enough. Her people murdered my family, burned my home to the ground, and now you expect me to tolerate her presence 3 miles from my ranch?" "I expect you to respect the law," Elijah replied. "This is my land, and I will welcome whoever I choose. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the sheriff." Hollister leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes glittering with malice. "The sheriff answers to money, Cole, and I have more money than you will ever see in your miserable life. You have until sundown tomorrow to get rid of her. After that, I will take matters into my own hands." He wheeled his horse around and rode away with his men, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of a threat that Elijah knew was not empty. The dust from Hollister's departure had barely settled when Kaya turned to face Elijah, her expression unreadable. She had not flinched during the confrontation, had not shown the slightest trace of fear, even when faced with such naked hatred. But now, in the silence that followed, he could see something shifting behind her dark eyes, a calculation that spoke of hard decisions being made. "I should leave," she said quietly. "I did not come here to bring trouble to your door. You have built a life in this place, and I will not be the reason it is destroyed." Elijah took her hands in his, holding them firmly as if afraid she might slip away like smoke. "No," he said. "I spent 10 years watching you walk away once. I will not do it again. Hollister is a bully who has terrorized this territory for too long. Someone needs to stand up to him, and it might as well be me." "You do not understand what men like him are capable of," Kaya replied. "I have seen it before, the hatred that consumes until there is nothing left but destruction. He will not stop with threats. He will burn your cabin, kill your horses, and if that does not drive you away, he will kill you. And then he will come for me. Then we will face him together," Elijah said. "The way we faced those soldiers in the mountains, the way we should have been facing everything for the past 10 years. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "But if we are going to fight, we must be smart about it. Hollister has money and men. We have only each other." That afternoon they rode into town together, drawing stares and whispers from every corner. Elijah kept Kaya close to his side, his hand resting casually on his revolver, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign of Hollister's men. The tension was palpable, thick as the dust that hung in the air, and he could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on them from every direction. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, a small adobe building near the center of town. Sheriff Tom Garza was a Mexican-American man in his 50s, respected for his fairness and his willingness to enforce the law, regardless of wealth or influence. He looked up from his desk as they entered, his weathered face betraying no surprise at the unusual pair standing before him. "Cole," he said, nodding in greeting. "I heard you might be coming to see me. Word travels fast in Copper Hollow." "Then you know why we are here," Elijah replied. "Wade Hollister threatened us this morning, gave us until sundown tomorrow to clear out or face the consequences." Garza leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes moving to Kaya with an expression that was curious rather than hostile. "And who might this lady be?" "My name is Kaya," she answered before Elijah could speak. "I am Chiricahua Apache. Elijah and I knew each other many years ago, and I came to find him. I have broken no laws and harmed no one." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. "But believing you and being able to protect you are two different things. Hollister has a lot of friends in this territory, and not all of them wear badges. I can arrest him if he breaks the law, but I cannot stop him from making your lives miserable in ways that leave no evidence." "So you are saying we are on our own," Elijah said, his voice flat with disappointment. "I am saying that the law has limits," Garza replied. "But I am also saying that I will do what I can within those limits. If Hollister or his men set foot on your property with intent to harm, you have every right to defend yourself, and if they do anything I can prove, I will throw them in a cell so fast their heads will spin." It was not the reassurance Elijah had hoped for, but it was something. They thanked the sheriff and left his office, stepping back onto the sun-baked street where curious eyes followed their every move. Their next stop was the general store, where they purchased supplies that might be needed if they had to defend the cabin, ammunition, rope, bandages, and enough food to last several weeks if they were forced to hole up. The store owner, a thin man named Peters, accepted their money without comment, but Elijah could see the disapproval in his eyes. Word of their situation had clearly spread through the entire town, and people were already choosing sides. Most would choose Hollister, either out of shared prejudice or simple fear of his retribution. The few who might sympathize with Elijah and Kaya would likely stay silent, rather than risk their own livelihoods. As they loaded their supplies onto the pack horse Elijah had brought, a voice called out from across the street. "Elijah Cole, you ought to be ashamed of yourself." He turned to see Martha Hollister, Wade's sister, standing on the boardwalk outside the dress shop with her arms crossed and her face twisted with righteous anger. "Bringing that savage into our town like she belongs here, your parents would roll over in their graves." Elijah felt Kaya stiffen beside him, but he placed a calming hand on her arm. "My parents taught me to judge people by their actions, not their blood," he replied evenly. "This woman has shown me more kindness and courage than most folks I have met. I will not apologize for standing beside her." Martha's face reddened with fury. "You will regret this," she hissed. "My brother will make sure of that." They rode out of town in silence, the weight of hostile stares pressing against their backs until the buildings disappeared behind them. Only when they were alone on the open road did Kaya finally speak. "They hate me without knowing me," she said. "It has always been this way. My grandmother said that hatred is a sickness of the spirit and that the only cure is love. But sometimes I wonder if there is enough love in the world to heal such deep wounds." Elijah reached over and took her hand. "We will find out together," he promised. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when they returned to the cabin, painting the desert in shades of amber and purple that seemed to set the very air on fire. They worked quickly to unload the supplies and secure the horses, both aware that Hollister's deadline was approaching and that the night ahead might bring danger. Elijah showed Kaya where he kept his weapons, a Winchester rifle mounted above the fireplace and a shotgun hidden beneath the bed, and together they discussed strategy for defending the property if it came to that. "I fought in the cavalry for 3 years," Elijah said as they sat together on the porch watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. "I know how men like Hollister think. He will not come himself, not at first. He will send his hired hands to do his dirty work, men who can be disavowed if things go wrong. They will come at night, hoping to catch us sleeping or to burn us out without a direct confrontation. My people learned long ago how to survive against greater numbers," Kaya replied. "We used the land itself as our ally, knowing every rock and canyon where we could hide or ambush our enemies. Your cabin sits in a good position, with clear sight lines in all directions. If we stay alert, we can see them coming before they reach us." They spent the remaining daylight preparing their defenses, positioning barrels of water around the cabin in case of fire, clearing brush that might provide cover for approaching attackers, and setting up simple alarm systems using rope and tin cans that would rattle if disturbed. It was grim work, the labor of people preparing for war, but there was also something satisfying about it, the sense of taking control rather than waiting helplessly for fate to decide their future. As darkness fell, they ate a simple meal and then took turns keeping watch through the night. Elijah insisted on taking the first shift, positioning himself by the window with his rifle across his lap, while Kaya rested on the bed. Sleep did not come easily to her, he could tell, and several times he heard her stirring restlessly, murmuring words in Apache that he could not understand. He wondered what dreams haunted her, what memories of loss and violence played behind her closed eyes. Nothing happened that first night. Dawn broke clear and cool, the desert awakening with its usual symphony of birdsong and rustling creatures, and Elijah allowed himself to hope that perhaps Hollister's threats had been empty bluster after all. But Kaya shook her head when he voiced this thought. "Men like him do not make empty threats," she said. "He is waiting, watching, trying to make us nervous. The attack will come when we least expect it, when our guard has begun to drop." She was right, of course. The second night passed without incident as well, and the third, and by the fourth day, Elijah found himself beginning to relax, despite his better judgment. Perhaps word had spread about their preparations. Perhaps Sheriff Garza had spoken to Hollister and warned him off. Perhaps the threat had simply evaporated like morning dew under the desert sun. On the fifth night, Elijah was dreaming of mountains and wildflowers when the sound of shattering glass jerked him awake. He rolled out of bed instinctively, grabbing the rifle even before his eyes had fully opened, and found Kaya already on her feet with the shotgun in her hands. A burning torch had been thrown through the window, its flames licking hungrily at the wooden floorboards. "Get water," Elijah shouted, rushing to stamp out the flames before they could spread. Outside, he could hear hoofbeats and whooping voices, the sounds of men drunk on violence and the certainty of their own righteousness. Another torch came through a different window, then another, and suddenly the cabin was filled with smoke and the hellish glow of multiple fires. They fought desperately to extinguish the flames, but for every fire they put out, 2 more seemed to spring up. The attackers were circling the cabin, throwing torches from all directions, never staying in one place long enough to present a clear target. Elijah fired through a window at a shadowy figure and heard a cry of pain, but there were too many of them and too few defenders. "We have to get out," Kaya shouted over the roar of the flames. "The roof is catching. If we stay, we will burn." It went against every instinct to abandon his home, the place he had built with his own hands over 5 years of backbreaking labor. But Kaya was right. The fire had spread too far to control, and staying meant certain death. He grabbed what supplies he could carry, ammunition and food and the saddlebags he kept packed for emergencies, and followed her toward the back door. They burst out into the night, coughing from the smoke, and immediately came under fire from the attackers positioned around the cabin. Elijah pushed Kaya down behind the water trough and returned fire, his Winchester barking in the darkness. He could see them now, at least 6 men on horseback, their faces hidden by bandanas circling like wolves around wounded prey. "The horses!" Kaya gasped. "We need the horses." The corral was 30 yards away, an impossible distance under fire. But Kaya did not wait for his agreement. She was already moving, running low and fast through the darkness, using every scrap of cover the terrain provided. Elijah fired rapidly, forcing the attackers to duck and weave, buying her precious seconds. He saw her reach the corral, saw her vault the fence with athletic grace, and begin freeing the horses. Then a shot rang out, different from the others, and Kaya stumbled. Time seemed to slow as Elijah watched her fall, her body crumpling against the fence post like a puppet with cut strings. The scream that tore from his throat was not entirely human. It was the sound of a man watching everything he loved being torn away, the howl of grief and rage that had been building inside him for 10 years, finally finding its voice. Elijah charged toward the corral with no thought for his own safety, firing his rifle from the hip as he ran. The attackers scattered before his fury, perhaps sensing that this was no longer a simple intimidation raid, but something far more dangerous. A man driven by love and desperation was capable of things that defied rational calculation, and Elijah Cole had become exactly that kind of man in the space of a single heartbeat. He reached Kaya's side and dropped to his knees, his hands searching frantically for the wound. She was conscious, her dark eyes wide with pain but still alert, and she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "My shoulder," she gasped. "It passed through. I can still move." Relief flooded through him, though he knew they were far from safe. He helped her to her feet, keeping his body between her and the circling riders. The horses were panicking in the corral, rearing and kicking at the fence, but Dusty recognized his master's voice when Elijah called out and came trotting toward them, despite his fear. There was no time for saddles or proper mounting. Elijah boosted Kaya onto Dusty's bare back and swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to hold her steady while the other gripped his rifle. He kicked the horse into motion, bursting through the corral gate and galloping into the darkness beyond. Behind them, his cabin was fully engulfed in flames, a beacon of destruction visible for miles across the flat desert landscape. Everything he owned was burning, every book and tool and piece of furniture he had accumulated over his years of wandering, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms, bleeding but alive, her heart beating against his chest as they fled into the night. The attackers pursued them for nearly a mile before giving up. They were not prepared for a chase across unfamiliar terrain in the darkness, and Elijah knew this land better than anyone. He guided Dusty through arroyos and around rock formations, using every trick he had learned in the cavalry to shake their pursuers. Finally, when he was certain they were no longer being followed, he slowed the horse to a walk and turned his attention to Kaya's wound. They stopped beside a seasonal creek, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that provided cover from prying eyes. Elijah helped Kaya down and laid her gently on the soft grass, then tore strips from his shirt to bind her shoulder. The bullet had indeed passed through cleanly, missing bone and major blood vessels, by what seemed like a miracle. She would be in pain for weeks and the wound would need proper medical attention to prevent infection. But she would survive. "You saved us," she whispered as he worked. "You came for me when any sensible man would have run." "I will always come for you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I lost you once. I will not lose you again." They rested there until dawn, hidden among the cottonwoods while the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Kaya drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting to heal itself while Elijah kept watch with his rifle across his lap. He thought about what they had lost and what they still had, about the hatred that had driven men to burn a stranger's home simply because he had chosen to love the wrong woman. When the sun rose, they faced the question of what to do next. The cabin was gone, their supplies lost in the fire. Kaya needed medical attention, but returning to Copper Hollow would be suicide. Hollister would surely have men watching for them, waiting to finish what they had started. "There is a place," Kaya said weakly. "A mission about 20 miles south near the border. The priests there helped my people during the worst times. They will not turn us away." It was their only option. Elijah helped her back onto Dusty, mounted behind her, and began the long ride south. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but also full of hidden refuges for those who knew where to look. Kaya directed him through canyons and across mesas, following paths that seemed invisible to his eyes, but were clearly familiar to her. They reached the mission late that afternoon, a small adobe complex surrounded by irrigated fields and fruit orchards that seemed miraculous in the harsh desert landscape. Father Miguel, an elderly priest with kind eyes and weathered brown skin, met them at the gate and asked no questions when he saw Kaya's blood-stained bandages. He simply ushered them inside and began preparing a room. The mission had a small infirmary, stocked with medicines and supplies that Father Miguel had accumulated over decades of serving the remote communities along the border. He cleaned and dressed Kaya's wound with practiced efficiency, then prescribed rest and herbal teas that he promised would speed her recovery. Elijah sat beside her bed throughout the process, holding her hand and refusing to leave her side. "You love her very much," Father Miguel observed as he finished his work. "It is written on your face as clearly as scripture on a page." "I do," Elijah admitted. "I have loved her for 10 years, though I only just found her again." The priest nodded thoughtfully. "Love that survives such separation is rare," he said. "It is a gift from God, and it should not be squandered. But it can also be dangerous in a world that fears what it does not understand." "I know," Elijah replied. "We have already learned that lesson." Father Miguel studied him for a long moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "Stay here as long as you need," he said. "This mission is sanctuary for all who seek refuge, regardless of their race or circumstances. But you should know that you cannot hide forever. Eventually, you will have to face the world that waits outside these walls." Elijah looked down at Kaya, who had fallen into a healing sleep, her dark hair spread across the white pillow like spilled ink. He knew the priest was right. But for now, for this moment, sanctuary was enough. 2 weeks passed at the mission, each day blending into the next in a rhythm of healing and quiet contemplation. Kaya's wound closed cleanly under Father Miguel's attentive care, the angry red flesh gradually fading to pink, and then to the pale beginnings of a scar that would mark her forever. She regained her strength slowly, first walking short distances within the mission walls, then venturing into the gardens where she helped the priests tend their vegetables and fruit trees. The work seemed to restore her spirit as much as rest restored her body, connecting her to the earth in ways that reminded her of her grandmother's teachings. Elijah spent his days helping with whatever labor needed doing, repairing fences and hauling water and assisting with the small herd of goats that provided milk and cheese for the mission community. He welcomed the physical exhaustion that came with honest work, the way it quieted the rage that still burned in his chest when he thought about Hollister and the men who had destroyed his home. At night, he sat with Kaya on the mission's small courtyard, watching the stars emerge one by one and talking about everything and nothing. They grew closer during those quiet days, their connection deepening beyond the desperate passion of their reunion into something more substantial and lasting. Elijah learned about her childhood, the games she had played with her cousins, the stories her grandmother had told around winter fires. She learned about his years in the cavalry, the things he had seen and done that still haunted his dreams, the guilt that had driven him to desert and spend a decade wandering in search of redemption. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of crimson and gold, Kaya took his hand and led him to a quiet corner of the garden where a small fountain bubbled peacefully among the flowers. She turned to face him, her dark eyes serious, and placed her palm against his cheek in that gesture that had become their private language of love. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I have been carrying since before I found you in Copper Hollow." Elijah felt a flutter of anxiety in his chest. "Whatever it is, you can tell me," he replied. "There are no secrets between us now." She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. "When I left you in the mountains 10 years ago," she began, "I was carrying something more than just the memory of your kindness. I was carrying your child." The words hit him like a physical blow, driving the breath from his lungs. He stared at her, unable to speak, his mind struggling to process what she had just revealed. A child. Their child. Created in those desperate days when they had clung to each other for survival and found something neither had expected. "What happened?" he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Tears glistened in Kaya's eyes, though she did not let them fall. "I gave birth to a daughter in the Sierra Madre," she said. "She had your eyes, green like desert sage after the rain. I named her Morning Star because she came to me at dawn and brought light into the darkness of my exile." Elijah's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear her words. "And where is she now?" he asked, afraid of the answer but needing to know. Kaya's composure finally cracked, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "She died," she whispered. "A fever took her when she was 3 years old. I tried everything my grandmother had taught me, every medicine and prayer I knew, but it was not enough. I buried her beneath a pine tree in the mountains, where she could watch the sun rise forever." The grief that washed over Elijah was overwhelming, crushing him beneath its weight. He had lost a child he never knew existed, a daughter with his eyes who had lived and died without ever knowing her father's face. The injustice of it, the terrible waste, was almost more than he could bear. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Because I was afraid," Kaya admitted. "Afraid that it would be too much, that the grief would destroy what we were building together. I have carried this pain alone for so long. I did not know how to share it." Elijah pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest as they both wept for the daughter they had lost. The fountain bubbled on, indifferent to human sorrow, and the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. They stood there for a long time, two broken people finding solace in each other's embrace, learning that love was not diminished by grief, but somehow deepened by it. When their tears were finally exhausted, they sat together on the fountain's edge, still holding hands, still drawing strength from each other's presence. Elijah thought about the life they might have had, the family they might have built, if circumstances had been different. But he also understood that dwelling on what might have been was a poison that would slowly destroy them both. "We cannot change the past," he said finally, "but we can honor her memory by building a future worth living. A future where her spirit can look down and see that her parents found their way back to each other, that love survived despite everything that tried to destroy it." Kaya nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "That is what I want," she said. "More than anything. I want to build something lasting with you, something that proves her short life had meaning." "Then that is what we will do," Elijah promised. "But first, we have unfinished business in Copper Hollow. Hollister cannot be allowed to escape justice for what he has done, not just to us but to everyone he has terrorized over the years." A fierce light kindled in Kaya's dark eyes, the warrior spirit that had sustained her through so much hardship. "Then we will face him together," she said, "and we will end this, one way or another." They left the mission 3 days later, armed with supplies that Father Miguel insisted they take, and blessings that the old priest offered with tears in his eyes. He had grown fond of them during their stay, this unlikely pair whose love defied the hatred that poisoned the world beyond his walls. He made them promise to return someday, to let him know how their story ended, and they gave that promise knowing it might be one they could not keep. The ride back to Copper Hollow took 2 days, longer than necessary because they traveled carefully, avoiding main roads and watching constantly for any sign of Hollister's men. Kaya's shoulder had healed enough that she could ride independently now, mounted on a gentle mare that Father Miguel had given them from the mission's small herd. She sat her horse with the natural grace of someone born to the saddle, her dark eyes scanning the horizon with the vigilance of a lifetime spent surviving in hostile territory. As they approached the outskirts of town, Elijah reined in his horse and turned to face her. "We need a plan," he said. "Riding in openly and confronting Hollister will only get us killed. He has too many men, too much power. We need to be smarter than that." Kaya nodded thoughtfully. "My people learned long ago that the strongest enemy can be defeated by patience and cunning," she said. "We do not need to destroy Hollister ourselves. We only need to expose him to strip away the protection that his money and influence provide. Once his crimes are known, his own community will turn against him." The question was how to accomplish such exposure. Hollister had been terrorizing the territory for years and everyone knew it, but knowing and proving were two different things. His hired men were loyal, bound to him by wages and fear, and the few witnesses who might testify against him were either dead or too frightened to speak. It was Kaya who suggested the solution. "The men who attacked your cabin," she said. "They were masked, but men talk when they drink. If we can find even one who is willing to testify, who is more afraid of the law than of Hollister, we might have a chance." They made camp outside town that night, hidden in a small canyon where their fire could not be seen from the road. Elijah slipped into Copper Hollow after dark, moving through the shadows with skills he had learned in the cavalry and honed during years of frontier survival. His destination was the Dusty Rose Saloon, where Hollister's ranch hands were known to spend their wages on whiskey and cards. He found a seat in a dark corner and nursed a single drink while watching and listening. The saloon was busy, filled with miners and cowboys seeking escape from their hard lives, and conversation flowed freely as the alcohol loosened tongues. It did not take long before he heard what he was looking for, a group of men at a nearby table boasting about the raid on his cabin. One of them, a young hand named Billy Sutton, seemed uncomfortable with the bragging. He drank more than the others and said less, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if afraid of being overheard. Elijah recognized the look of a man whose conscience was troubling him, a man who might be persuaded to make a different choice if given the opportunity. He waited until Billy excused himself to use the outhouse, then followed him outside. The young man was barely 20, with the soft features of someone not yet hardened by frontier life. He startled when Elijah emerged from the shadows, reaching for a gun he was clearly not skilled enough to use effectively. "Easy," Elijah said, raising his hands to show he meant no immediate harm. "I just want to talk." Billy's eyes widened with recognition. "You are Cole," he stammered, "the one whose cabin we burned. Hollister said you were dead. As you can see, I am very much alive." Elijah kept his voice calm, almost friendly. "And I know you were there that night. I also know you did not want to be. I could see it in the way you hung back, the way you hesitated while the others threw their torches." The young man's face crumpled with guilt and fear. "I did not have a choice," he said. "Hollister owns my family's debt. If I refuse him, he will take our farm and throw my mother and sisters into the street." Elijah felt a flicker of sympathy despite his anger. "Hollister uses that trick on many people," he said. "He collects debts and then collects souls along with them. But there is another way, Billy. You can help me stop him, and in doing so, free yourself and everyone else he has trapped." They talked for nearly an hour, hidden in the darkness behind the saloon while the sounds of revelry drifted through the walls. Billy was frightened, but he was also tired of living under Hollister's thumb, tired of doing things that violated his conscience and kept him awake at night. By the time they parted, Elijah had secured his agreement to testify before Sheriff Garza about everything he had witnessed, not just the raid on the cabin, but other crimes as well, including a murder that Hollister had ordered 3 years ago. Elijah returned to their camp and shared the news with Kaya, who listened with growing hope in her eyes. "This could work," she said. "If Billy testifies, others might find the courage to come forward as well. Hollister's empire is built on fear, and fear crumbles when people realize they are not alone. But they both knew that getting Billy to the sheriff's office would not be easy. Hollister had eyes everywhere, and the moment he suspected betrayal, he would act to silence the threat permanently. They would need to move quickly and carefully, protecting their witness while building a case that even Hollister's money could not dismiss. "Tomorrow," Elijah said, pulling Kaya close as they settled in for the night. "Tomorrow we end this one way or another." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Together," she whispered. "We end it together." Dawn broke gray and cold over Copper Hollow, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain before nightfall. Elijah and Kaya rode into town with Billy Sutton between them, the young man pale with fear but resolute in his determination to do the right thing. They had spent the early morning hours going over his testimony, ensuring he understood exactly what he needed to say and preparing him for the consequences that would follow. His life in Copper Hollow was over, regardless of the outcome, but Elijah had promised to help him start fresh somewhere else, somewhere Hollister's reach could not extend. Sheriff Garza met them at the door of his office, his weathered face betraying surprise at their arrival. He listened in silence as Billy poured out his story, documenting crimes that stretched back nearly a decade: the raid on Elijah's cabin, the murder of a rancher who had refused to sell his water rights, the systematic intimidation of families throughout the territory. With each revelation, the sheriff's expression grew darker, his pen scratching furiously across the pages of his notebook. "This is enough," Garza said when Billy finally fell silent. "More than enough. I will need to bring in the territorial marshal to handle an arrest this big, but Hollister will face justice for what he has done." The news spread through Copper Hollow like wildfire. By midday, crowds had gathered outside the sheriff's office, some demanding Hollister's head, and others defending him with the desperate loyalty of those whose livelihoods depended on his favor. Elijah kept Kaya close, his hand never far from his revolver, watching the shifting mood of the crowd with wary eyes. It was late afternoon when Wade Hollister himself appeared, riding down the main street with a dozen armed men at his back. His face was twisted with rage, all pretense of civilized respectability stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. He reined in his horse before the sheriff's office and stared at Elijah with eyes that promised death. "You think you have won," he snarled. "You think a few words from a coward like Sutton can bring me down? I built this territory, I own it, and I will burn it to the ground before I let savages and traitors take it from me." Sheriff Garza stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the fading sunlight. "Wade Hollister, you are under arrest for murder, arson, and conspiracy. Surrender your weapons and come peacefully, or face the consequences." For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Hollister's hand hovered over his gun, his eyes darting between the sheriff and the crowd that had gathered to witness his downfall. His men shifted nervously, sensing that the tide had turned against them, that loyalty to a falling tyrant was a poor wager for their lives. It was Kaya who broke the standoff. She stepped forward, placing herself directly in Hollister's line of sight, her dark eyes meeting his with a courage that made Elijah's heart swell with pride and terror. "You have spent your life hating my people," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent street. "Blaming us for your pain, using that pain to justify cruelty beyond measure. But hatred is a fire that consumes the one who carries it. Look at yourself, Wade Hollister. Look at what you have become." Something shifted in Hollister's face, a crack in the armor of rage that had sustained him for so long. For just a moment, Elijah saw the man he might have been, the grieving husband and father whose loss had twisted him into something unrecognizable. Then the moment passed, and Hollister's hand dropped away from his gun. "Take me," he said to the sheriff, his voice hollow with defeat. "But know that this changes nothing. The hatred will go on, with or without me. It is woven into the very fabric of this land." "Perhaps," Kaya replied, "but love is woven there too, and love is stronger." The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later, and Wade Hollister was transported to Tucson for trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and within a month he had been convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to hang. His ranch was seized to pay restitution to his victims, and the families he had terrorized for years finally began to breathe freely again. Elijah used his share of the settlement to purchase a small spread near the mission where they had found refuge, a piece of land with good water and fertile soil where he and Kaya could build a new life together. Father Miguel performed their wedding ceremony on a spring morning, with the desert blooming around them, and the ghosts of their past finally laid to rest. They built their home with their own hands, adobe walls and timber beams, a garden where Kaya planted the herbs her grandmother had taught her to cultivate. The community that grew around them was small but welcoming, a mix of cultures and backgrounds united by the simple desire to live in peace. Some still looked askance at the Apache woman who had married a white rancher, but their numbers dwindled with each passing year as prejudice gave way to familiarity and respect. On the anniversary of their reunion, Kaya placed her hand against Elijah's cheek and smiled the fierce, tender smile that had haunted his dreams for a decade. "I told you I would find you," she said, "no matter how long it took." He covered her hand with his own, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You did," he agreed. "And now that you have found me, I am never letting you go." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched the sun set over their land. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily against the crimson sky, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. They had lost so much, both of them, a daughter they had never raised together, years of separation, homes burned and lives upended. But they had found each other again, and in that finding they had discovered something worth more than all the gold in Arizona territory. "I love you," Kaya whispered. "I love you too," Elijah replied, "and I always will." The hawk dipped its wings and soared toward the mountains, carrying with it the promise of all their tomorrows.